India in the 1520s was a land of immense wealth, but it was cracking under its own weight. At the center of this fractured landscape was the Delhi Sultanate. Its ruler, Ibrahim Lodi, was deeply unpopular, facing open rebellion from his own Afghan nobles, who were tearing the state apart from the inside. Watching this chaos from his mountain stronghold in Kabul was Babur. He was a Central Asian warlord of Timurid descent, a prince without a permanent kingdom, scanning the horizon for an opportunity to expand his reach. According to the traditional historical narrative, the opportunity came knocking right at his door. Disaffected Indian leaders, including the powerful governor Daulat Khan Lodi and the Rajput king Rana Sanga, sent envoys to Kabul. Their message was a direct invitation for Babur to cross the mountains and invade. These local lords thought they were making a shrewd strategic move. They assumed Babur would act exactly like his notorious ancestor, Timur. They expected him to march in, depose the unpopular sultan, loot the treasury, and retreat to the mountains, leaving them behind to rule the ashes. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. Babur marched down and crushed the Sultanate's army at the Battle of Panipat. But instead of packing up his spoils and leaving, he turned on the men who invited him and claimed the entire empire for himself. This creates a direct contradiction between the image of the invited guest and the actions of the imperial conqueror. It forces a closer look at whether Babur was simply an opportunist who overstayed a welcome, or a strategist executing a takeover he had planned long before the first envoy arrived. If you look closely at the chronological timeline of Babur's military movements, the idea that he only invaded because he was invited falls completely apart. This chart tracks Babur's military actions leading up to the conquest. You can see that he was already conducting aggressive military raids into the Punjab region, specifically in Bajar and Bira, starting in 1519. That is years before those envoys ever showed up in Kabul. Then there is the psychological evidence. Years before anyone asked him to intervene, Babur had a newborn son. He named him Hindal, which literally translates to the taking of India. As historical analysis of his own memoirs reveals, Babur's intentions always went beyond mere assistance. He aimed for total sovereignty from the start. Those invitations from the Indian nobles were never the catalyst for the Mughal Empire. They were simply a convenient diplomatic cover story, a pretext that accelerated a hostile takeover Babur had already set in motion. Behind the talk of invitations and alliances lay the reality of Babur's situation in Central Asia. He was a prince with an army he could no longer afford to pay. He was, at this point, a bankrupt prince. After being repeatedly driven out of his ancestral lands in Samarkand by the rival Uzbeks, Babur found himself trapped in a geopolitical stalemate. His base in Kabul was an incredibly difficult environment. The local economy was unable to generate enough revenue to sustain his large army of mercenaries and nobles, whose loyalty depended on continuous payouts. This data visualization shows exactly what Babur was after. Compare the meager revenue output of his Afghan territories to the staggering agricultural and mercantile wealth of Hindustan. Once established, his new Indian domains would yield a massive 520 million tankas. The geography of Hindustan provided the economic lifeline that Kabul's mountains could not. This 50-fold increase in revenue offered the only way for Babur to reward his followers and finally secure his dynasty. Once Babur entrenched himself in his new capital and it became clear he wasn't leaving, the political backlash was immediate. His former allies realized they had been played. Led by the powerful Rajput king Rana Sanga, they formed a massive interfaith coalition to destroy the Mughal invader. Inside the walls, Babur faced a full-blown crisis. His troops were heavily outnumbered, terrified of Rajput valor on the battlefield, and deeply homesick for the cooler climate of Kabul. They were on the absolute verge of mutiny. So, Babur deployed an emergency propaganda strategy. He publicly banned wine, a major shift for a man who openly loved it, ordered his expensive ceramic jugs smashed to pieces, and officially adopted the title of Ghazi, or Holy Warrior. But this sudden burst of religious zeal contradicts his actual track record. Babur frequently allied with Shia Muslims when it suited him, and the supposedly infidel coalition he was currently fighting actually included a large number of Afghan Muslims. By rebranding a political turf war as a holy struggle, Babur successfully manufactured a sense of divine purpose in his troops at the exact moment their morale was collapsing. The strategy worked. Babur won the decisive battles, secured his new empire, and the local lords who believed they could use him as a temporary pawn were permanently swept into the dustbin of history. But his final, and perhaps most powerful weapon, wasn't used on the battlefield. It was his diary. The Bab-Noma is a meticulous, intimate record of his life, and the ultimate tool in his justification engine. Through his memoirs, Babur managed to retroactively edit his own narrative. He wrote down a version of events that portrayed him as a divinely favored monarch, betrayed by faithless locals, carefully omitting the fact that he was, by all pragmatic measures, a desperate warlord executing a hostile land grab. The story of Babur reveals a harsh reality about the game of empires. Historical justifications, whether they are diplomatic invitations or sudden declarations of holy war, are often just strategic pretexts. Because ultimately, the victor doesn't just win the land, they win the exclusive right to write the history.